Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome everyone and good evening. We're here on time, so I think we can get started at least with the introductions. I am the introducer to the introducer, so this is the pre-appetizer. I'd like to welcome everyone who's here. We may have some friends who will be joining us in a few moments, but I'd like to welcome all of you who are here for this evening's program. Welcoming Adam Blue of Stand With Us and Rabbi Okin, together with all of you who are joining us for tonight's program that's titled "What Purim Teaches Us About Combating Anti-Semitism." I'm going to turn the microphone over to Rabbi Okin in a few moments, but I just wanted to welcome in particular Adam. And Adam, it's really so nice to have you join us again. Could be that some of you were with us in August. Doesn't this seem like a long time ago? Last August, where Adam gave what I found to be, and I know that everyone else who participated found to be, a very enlightening presentation on the title of Strengthening Your Zionist Narrative. You remember that title, don't you, Adam? You remember this? And
Oh, of
and
course.
one of the and one of the things that I love about Stand With Us, which perhaps Adam will have the opportunity to share a little bit about his organization, is that with the polarization that exists in the world today, especially in the Jewish people, one of the things that we have in common, that almost all of us have in common, certainly as Jews, is our support of and our desire to advocate for Israel. So it's wonderful to be here this evening to gather together to hear what I'm sure will be Adam's fascinating take, combining both a little bit of a Vorspice and appetizer for Purim with some expert insights on anti-Semitism from the perspective of an educator who works with high school and with college students, among others. I now would like to turn the microphone, so to speak, at least metaphorically, over to Rabbi Okin, who will share with us an idea or two and then introduce Adam.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Smason. Good evening, everyone. Our rabbis Chazal tell us that both Haman and Achashverosh were evil. In fact, both of these two gentlemen wanted to wipe out the Jewish people. It's just that Haman took the initiative to get the ball rolling. At some point, Mordechai probably attended a similar presentation to the one that Adam Blue will be giving tonight. And this enabled him to recognize the anti-Semitism of Haman and Achashverosh, unlike other Jews at the time who didn't see the time. Adam Blue is very capable of teaching us about anti-Semitism and how we can advocate and protect ourselves as a community. Adam is the senior Midwest High School coordinator for Stand With Us, an international and nonpartisan Israel education organization that inspires and educates people of all ages and backgrounds, challenges misinformation in the community at large, and fights anti-Semitism wherever it may be. Adam graduated from Indiana University with his BA in History and Jewish Studies, and he is currently living in Chicago, Illinois. Prior to attending university, he spent a gap year in Israel where he studied in Jerusalem, as well as volunteering at a boarding school near Haifa. Adam, without any further ado, we're looking forward to your presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Now I can just figure out how my mute buttons work. It's not like we haven't been doing this for long enough. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Rabbi Okin and Rabbi Smason, for having me back. It's so nice to be joining your community once more. It's funny, we mentioned last time that the presentation that we were supposed to be doing in person is sort of my measurement of the last time I gave an in-person presentation. I just think it's funny that on this day 1 year ago, I was actually also leading a group of 8th graders, taking them on, for many of them, their first trip to Israel. We took them on a community trip. So if anyone is finding themselves thinking back, well, where was I a year ago in the life of an Israel educator? I was on a plane going to Israel, before they shut down, and everyone here went, is that extreme? That feels like maybe it's extreme. They're shutting down the country. Well, we followed shortly after. So it's nice to be back. It's nice to join all of you, and hopefully we'll be able to give a presentation that will inspire some the same way we inspired Mordechai. However, I doubt there will be less PowerPoint animations in that presentation than I have in mine. So today I'm going to see if I can share my PowerPoint. This is the right one. And now to make it full screen. Fantastic. And I'm also just going to check really quickly that I'm also sharing my sound, which will come into play much later, but not yet. So again, today we're going to be talking about anti-Semitism, and one of the things that we often have to go over with our students in high school is this issue of anti-Semitism, because when we talk about anti-Semitism that the students are experiencing or that they've heard about with our interns being from all over the country and also from Canada, their experiences look different. And unfortunately, the replies that we need them to give need to be unique. They need to be empowered, but there also needs to be a little bit of nuance with all of them, because when we come up against anti-Semitism, it can be traumatic, first and foremost. In addition to knowing, what do I say, what do I do, we also need to be teaching our students, we need to be educating ourselves how to address the emotions of coming face to face with hatred. And so when we look at anti-Semitism, this is an adaptation of one of the programs that we actually teach all of our interns. And I can speak a little bit more about our internship program, about the students that we work very directly with. But we share this information with as many students, as many communities as possible, to try and help students understand that when you come face to face with hate, what are you going to do? What should you expect to be done? And so as we get started, we need to ask ourselves, what is anti-Semitism? Does anybody want to give us a definition? It's the audience participation section. That is totally fine. If anybody wants to put something in the chat just so we can share, maybe get a couple of different perspectives. It's one of those things that people can definitely identify anti-Semitism. They can tell you something makes them feel like this is anti-Semitic. But oftentimes we'll hear people say, oh, that's not anti-Semitism, because we'll hear people justify their actions, their statements. People will get defensive when confronted with the accusation that you're being anti-Semitic. And so what is really good to do is have a very clear definition of what anti-Semitism is. And one of the areas that we actually really encourage our students, our communities to be aware of, something that we encourage them to use, is the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, or the IHRA, working definition of anti-Semitism. And the reason we point to that is because when we read the full language of their description, anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed toward Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. If we have any lawyers on the call, what I might say is, you might take issue with, or maybe not issue, but you might say that's kind of reductionist. But one of the things I encourage the students to understand is that when we have this language, unless we are lawyers, especially if we're teenagers, maybe some of us on this call, we're looking at this language and we're thinking to ourselves, this is a lot of words. How would I remember this? How do I say this to somebody? And one of the most important things that we understand from this definition is not only that the IHRA is an international nonpartisan body that is doing the work of trying to educate themselves, others, different institutions around the world about the horrors of the Holocaust and the horrors of anti-Semitism, but also this definition provides certain protections when adopted by different agencies, whether it be the US State Department, whether it be individual schools. High school can adopt this definition of anti-Semitism. And the reason we need a clear definition is because it allows us to then take action to protect students when they experience this kind of hatred. More simply, for those of us without law degrees, we can just Google define anti-Semitism and we come up with hostility to or prejudice against Jews. We can see that how it fits into the IHRA working definition. But when we understand, this is a lot more tangible. We can hold this a lot easier. Hostility to or prejudice against Jews. It's simple. We can understand that. But the important thing we should also understand is that this language is the same kind of language used to describe other forms of hatred. Racism, prejudice, discrimination, antagonism directed against a person or people on the basis of their membership of a particular racial or ethnic group. Sexism, prejudice, stereotyping, discrimination on the basis of gender. And so when we're talking about these different forms of hatred, we should understand that anti-Semitism is exactly that. It's a form of hatred. And just because our community around us may not know how to identify it the way that we can, we should not back down when we have hate in our community. If we treat anti-Semitism like it's not hatred, like it's not hostility or bigotry or discrimination, if we don't use this kind of language, if we as a community can't identify it as hate speech, how do we expect people to help us address it writ large? So at this point, I'd like to identify a couple of unfortunate examples of anti-Semitism. Does anybody remember seeing this story maybe a year ago? Does anybody remember what happened here? Also gonna do my best. I can't really see all the faces, but I'll try to get a few more people. What was going on in this picture, for anyone who is looking at it and thinking, wow, it's a little bit blurry. I just want everyone to know that I do have the original photo. It was sent to me by one of my interns in Minnesota a couple of years ago, because what you have here in her community, the Sweethearts dance is a turnabout or a Sadie Hawkins, where the girls ask the guys to a school dance. And these teenagers thought it would be a good idea to use a series of puns, all related to Hitler, Nazis, and the Holocaust. They also decided, obviously, to make a Nazi salute, and they put this on the internet for other people to see. And for my intern to grab a screenshot and send to me so that we could continue a conversation either with these students or with the school offline. And what we see here is, again, if maybe we want to do, I'm for anyone who is familiar with Zoom, I have you in grid view. I can see more faces, not everybody, but if we want to do this, if we want to do either raised hands or if we want to do quick reflections, what's troubling about this image to somebody? Like what stands out?
I can't see the thing.
Well, the Nazi salute to begin with.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's no mistaking that for anything else at this point in time. It's hatred. It's wanting to go back to that. Oh,
Yeah.
I would say that we have a couple of teenagers who have no concept of history, and they're using cute puns in their idea, cute puns to advocate their love for each other, and they have no concept of history as to what they're really saying.
I think you're being charitable.
Absolutely. And the things that, at the same time that I'm working with my interns who are exactly the age of these students, the thing that we're seeing amongst our communities is that exactly that. These students have absolutely no concept of exactly how hateful this is. This isn't cute. This isn't nice. And if they are in a space where this is acceptable, that's a much bigger community issue. There is a significant lack of education. There is perhaps even a bigger lack of awareness. The problem is that doesn't change unless people say something. If we are not able to identify what exactly about this is problematic, if we as a community can't say to these students, this is why this is wrong, this is why we need these definitions, they won't change. They won't, there's no negative reinforcement. I've told I asked my students, I was like, do you ever ask your friends, is this cute? Do I look good in this? Should I put this on the internet? This is a very large poster board. This was like, I'm assuming there was some kind of reveal. Making the poster board, going to someone's house to ask them, taking the photo, taking another photo and being like, oh, let's put our hands up, and then putting it online. At some point, so many people could have said, don't do that. It's a really insensitive, really bad idea. And like, I don't know why you think this is funny, but even if you think this is funny, why would you put this online? This got a lot of national press. This isn't a good look for these students. Additionally, we're probably familiar with more traditional examples of anti-Semitic graffiti. This was a synagogue in Carmel, Indiana. Another one of my interns this year actually goes to a congregation in this community, not this one, but this incident affected him and his community as well. Indianapolis is not the largest Jewish community, and so this really struck the community hard to see this again very overt anti-Semitism directly graffitied onto a synagogue. So we understand these are rhetorical and physical implementations of this kind of anti-Semitism. So now that we've identified, it's important that we be able to understand. I'm just going to switch back to the smaller view. As we go into, from the moment that we've identified anti-Semitism, it's important that we think to ourselves. It's important that we ask ourselves, okay, well, now what? What do I think is going to happen? What do I expect to happen in my community? Again, when we identify anti-Semitism as hate speech, we understand that hate speech and hate crimes are made to make are there to make us feel intimidated. They're meant to to make us feel alone, to feel like our community around us isn't going to help us. Because if our community around us cared about us, how could this happen? And when nobody stands up and says anything, it makes us feel this way. It makes our students, they see swastikas in the bathrooms of their schools. They hear anti-Semitic jokes at lunch tables. We see this kind of graffiti. We see this kind of bigotry. And when people say nothing, our teens think this is just what our community is about. Sometimes we'll hear our students say, oh, well, I know they're joking. I know it's a joke. It's funny to me. Like, I know my friends. It's not that big of a deal. Even at that level, we need to empower our students to be able to identify to each other. I know you. I understand that you're not being bigoted. But what about the people who hear you? What about the people who think this is acceptable? The people who think that this isn't going to hurt anyone around them? We need to teach our students to be able to have that conversation while also knowing that they are in a safe space. They're in a community. They are not alone. They should not be afraid. And so when we see these instances, we ask our students, who do you expect to do something? Who do you expect to act? What do you think is going to happen? If anybody wants to tell us when we saw these students, or when we see graffiti on the wall of a synagogue, or graffiti in the bathroom at school, who do we expect to take action?
I would hope other people of goodwill.
Other people of goodwill.
Other people of goodwill, Gentiles, non-Jews, Jews
Right.
as well, of course.
Non-Jews, Jews. In a school setting, maybe the administration. We really hope that the school administration would step up and speak with these students at the very least, perhaps address the lack of Holocaust education in their schools at the very least. We would hope that the local authorities would get involved in dealing with anti-Semitic graffiti on a public building like a synagogue. We would expect that the town might make some sort of statement depending on where it is. And we actually saw that in Baraboo, Wisconsin. If anybody remembers this incident, this happened the first year that I was the high school coordinator. This was actually a photo that sort of resurfaced from a homecoming dance. And this was an entire class, I believe it was the junior class of boys in Baraboo, Wisconsin. For anyone who's not familiar with Baraboo, Wisconsin, feel free to look it up. They're a city of, I think it was something like 12,000 people, maybe 13. Anywho, they were doing a campaign, hashtag Baraboo Strong. And this was a photo that was tagged with their hashtag. The school was engaging in sort of like a Pride Week. And the school district stepped up the next morning, 7 a.m. The day after this photo sort of resurfaced. It had been taken months earlier, but it was with the hashtag Baraboo Proud. And the school board on Twitter says, we're investigating. We're going to pursue the available and appropriate actions, including legal, to address. This does not represent our values as a community. I'll let you know. I reached out to the school and I said, hi, like I do Israel and Holocaust education, and I'd be happy to help and, address the issue of anti-Semitism. I got back a thank you very much for looking into all, possible avenues. And that was the end of my communication with Baraboo, Wisconsin. But one of the things that I think is sometimes underrated is not just the response of the local community, which for anyone who can see right here, you have 5.4 thousand likes and 5.4 thousand comments on this tweet. So it's getting some traction, this very small community. This made a bit of a splash. But one of the things that we should also know is that when we as a community, a larger community, can also come out and say, this is bad, we need to educate about this better, we can start to see how our larger community can sort of step in and make comments. The Auschwitz Memorial actually, that same morning, about 3 hours before the school district of Baraboo, the Auschwitz Memorial official account on Twitter tweeted about this story, saying that it's hard to find words. This is exactly why we need to be doing our education work absolutely every day. And we can see that this has 92,000 likes. This is 37.1 thousand interactions on Twitter. This tiny town was not ready for this kind of response. And so we can see the different ways that we can put pressure on people to do better education, where we can hold our communities accountable. And so we want to understand, again, in these moments, our students are not alone. Hate speech, this, I noticed today as I was looking back over this presentation that this student right here in the front is actually making a little OK symbol, which for anyone who is not aware is actually potentially the OK is a W and a P. It stands for white power. I can't say definitively that that's what this student is doing. I think given the context of the rest of the photo, we can see that the messaging here is clear. It is anti-Semitic, it is hateful, and in the moment, organizations did the right thing. They called out this hatred. But does it continue? What comes next? We've identified as a community, this is anti-Semitism, this is hatred. We know that we need to speak out because our community needs to stop hate speech. We control what is and is not acceptable. And so what do? We educate. In order to be an effective educator about anti-Semitism, we need to understand that we should be condemning actions, ideas, speech, not necessarily people. When we attack people, label, when we label people as anti-Semites, people will get very defensive. It's their first reaction. Nobody likes to be called an anti-Semite. Not even anti-Semites like to be called anti-Semites. And so when we call someone an anti-Semite, they will get defensive. But if we can explain why something is anti-Semitic, that is indefensible. Hate speech is indefensible. Hateful people, unfortunately, are. And so when we're speaking to people so that they will hopefully listen to us, because as a group of Jews, but also as people just with the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism in our full awareness, and even just with Google in our pockets to tell us that anti-Semitism is hostility and prejudice against Jews, we know that anti-Semitism is wrong And so when we go to tell people why it's bad, why we're offended, why we should be more sensitive to people who, even if I'm not necessarily offended by such and such joke, these people might be for these reasons. You need to know why this is hateful. We want them to listen to us because we have that information. We have that knowledge, and we need to be able to share it effectively. So labeling someone as an anti-Semite isn't quite good enough. We need to be able to explain to them why something is anti-Semitic. We need to be able to use our passion, but not get angry with people. We need to also understand that for a lot of people, potentially even these students in Minnesota with their awful, awful puns, they may have never been told, don't do that. If this is their first interaction with that, to demonize these children instead of giving them proper education, we're not necessarily setting them up to do better in the future. And so as educators, as people who are concerned with rising anti-Semitism, we want to effectively combat it through education. We also don't want to ignore the fact that, unfortunately, there are hateful people. There are anti-Semites, even if they don't like to be called that by name. And when we are going into any of these situations, the thing that I will also encourage everyone to remember is that even though hate speech is trying to make us feel alone, and we should know that we never are, there are also dangerous situations. You, our students, we need to be aware of those situations. And when we are surrounded by hateful people, maybe not the time to educate. It's unfortunate, but it is also an important lesson that we all need to know. So I'd like to dig into another example, sort of an expanded example, where I think we can sort of see all three of these steps play out from an incident that actually took place over the summer. Some of you might remember the controversy from over the summer where a Philadelphia Eagles football player, and the text is mostly flavor of what I'm saying. Don't feel like you need to read, because if you do feel like you need to read, and if you're looking for a challenge in much smaller text, I actually have the original Instagram post. So if you're really interested in trying to read that, I'll explain through the situation. But for anyone who's really, trying to test their eyesight, which I need to go back to the eye doctor and do, we might remember that Deshaun Jackson is a football player in the NFL, plays for the Philadelphia Eagles. And so over the summer, he posted something on his Instagram. He was apparently doing some off-season reading. He wanted to share something from the book. Really, all you need to know is the text begins, Hitler said that because white Jews, and really from there, you can stop. When you're invoking Hitler and using Hitler as your example of what Hitler thought about white Jew, it's a bad idea. And anyone who isn't aware of that is in for a, I believe it's referred to as a Twitter, well, it's a poo storm, but it's not. It's a bit worse language. But I work with teens, so we don't use that. So when we're looking at this situation, Instagram basically erupted. The comments on this were, you're being anti-Semitic. Everyone is rushing to defend Deshaun Jackson. Why are you're unfortunately, a lot of people siding with Deshaun Jackson saying, well, he's right, which is also very, very concerning. Fortunately, even though the responses were not all what we would have hoped for, many of them were. And whoever was closest to Deshaun Jackson got through to him because we got an apology almost immediately. This is where it starts to get tricky. If someone is called out for being anti-Semitic and then they apologize, how do we know if we can believe them? I don't know Deshaun Jackson. I did direct message him after this happened. You'll see why in a minute. But he apologized. I want to apologize to the Jewish community, Jeffrey Lurie, Howie Roseman, Doug Peterson, the Eagles organization, the owners of the Eagles, and our fans for the insensitive and ill-informed posts that I shared on my social media. My intention was to uplift, unite, and encourage my culture with positivity and light. Unfortunately, that did not happen. I unintentionally hurt the Jewish community in the process, and for that, I am sorry. We see the post. There was actually also a video that he posted. It's no longer on his Instagram. It was like a temporary video. When you watched it, it's up to everyone to sort of see with their own eyes, but I've got to tell you, it looked like someone who genuinely didn't know he was being hurtful. My grandparents survived the Holocaust. I have been steeped in Holocaust education. I grew up in the North Shore of Chicago. I find it very hard to believe that someone could be that ill-informed about Hitler, about the Holocaust. And that's one of the reasons we need to remember that this is not, unfortunately, common knowledge all the time. And if we jump to tell people you're an anti-Semite, you hate Jews, you hate, like, that truly may not have been what he was intending. But it's a hard sell. You quoted Hitler. The quote actually isn't from Hitler. It's attributed to Hitler. It's actually misattributed to Hitler, as so much Nazi, neo-Nazi issues are misattributed and just obviously misguided. But what we saw happen next is what we want to focus on in this example. From the institution, we got almost an immediate comment from the team to go along with Deshaun Jackson's apology. We had the team making a statement saying that not only that they were apologized. Oh, also, I'm sorry. I want to also go back. I want to point out that Deshaun Jackson said, "I'm committed to doing my part in making this world a better place for our children. I will fully educate myself and work with local and national organizations to be more informed." I think that's a very important thing that he adds to his initial apology: being educated and being informed. And again, words are nice, actions are better. And so what did we see happen next? We saw the team, the owners, the administration. They said, "This is inappropriate. We've spoken with Deshaun. We're addressing it. Not only that, but we are also going to continue our commitment to educating not only Deshaun, but also the rest of our team, and also continuing to evaluate the circumstances and taking appropriate action." So we see, again, the broader community from one person, the community around them said, "You did something wrong. Now let's educate you how to be better." We also saw that many other athletes stepped up and made comments addressing anti-Semitism directly. At the time, over the summer, maybe some of you even felt this way. I know I certainly did. But when this immediately happened, there were a lot of Jewish voices standing up and saying, "This is anti-Semitism. This is what it looks like. This is it right here. We're having this problem." There were a lot of people who didn't seem to speak out. A lot of people who wanted to fight about, "Oh, well, this isn't, this is, this isn't, this is." And the question always comes back, why aren't members of other communities standing up and addressing this issue? I heard that from a lot of my peers. I heard it from a lot of my students. I think one of the important things that we should be remembering, especially from this summer, when it was such a heightened moment of social awareness, so for a lot of these people, this is not an issue that they recognize every day. It's not something that they see all the time. And when they did come face to face to it, Dick Vitale made a comment pointing to Charles Barkley addressing the issue of Deshaun Jackson. For anyone who's not aware, Dick Vitale does a lot of sports commentating on college basketball. I personally, fine, he likes Duke a little bit too much for me, but that's a different presentation. But what we see is we have Dick Vitale, a sports commentator who talks about college basketball, saying that Charles Barkley, a Hall of Fame basketball player, saying that we need to be more aware of anti-Semitism. We need to speak out about this. This is injustice too. Emmanuel Acho, for anyone who isn't aware, you might not remember him from his sports, from his time playing in the NFL, but he's actually running a series called Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man, which again, over the summer, he really stepped into this role of wanting to address these issues and using his platform to be able to do that. His commentary on addressing anti-Semitism was "Ignorance is no longer an excuse." And you have, again, it says here, NBA legend Kareem Abdul-Jabbar speaking out against anti-Semitism. I'll read it again. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, right, speaking out against anti-Semitism. And in his Hollywood Reporter article, I don't share it with the students, but I do maybe direct them to it. He uses some very strong language to combat anti-Semitism. And if anyone hasn't read it, it's pretty good. And so again, we see the community action. For anyone who was feeling alone when this was taking place, and I did see that there was a question, which I'd be happy to take in just a moment. But for anyone who was feeling alone while this was taking place, I wanted to make sure that we highlighted, look at all these people who spoke out. Look at all these people who have absolutely no reason to be speaking out against anti-Semitism any other day of the year. Hearing me talk about anti-Semitism is like hearing Michael Jordan talk about basketball. And now that I'm comparing myself to Michael Jordan, I'm immediately feeling bad about it, but also it's apt. And so when we see this conversation taking place outside of where we expect it to, it means that we're getting that community support that hate speech is trying to take away from us. There was a question. So before we go on to this example, which I think is absolutely wonderful, of a quality response, it was Alan. I think Alan had a question about the statement.
About the statement or the overall question.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we look at this picture from Baraboo, Wisconsin.
Yes.
Baraboo, Wisconsin is 156 miles north of Milwaukee, an area that's known to law enforcement as being white supremacist neighborhoods. And okay, so it's a white supremacist neighborhood. They don't like black people. They don't like Jews, probably don't like Mexicans. They don't like anybody except white people in America. But let's look at this overall. My question is, what is being taught in public schools today? And I don't mean just the big Los Angeles, New York's, hopefully St. Louis. What's being taught in the public schools today about the Holocaust? Or is it being taught at all? Because if this is just a reflection of the community around them, no wonder the people of Baraboo didn't answer you, because it's a reflection of the community.
Yeah, and I think that the unfortunate answer actually goes back to, or that I sort of give, is sort of the inspiration for my work, and also hopefully the inspiration for all of us being here tonight. But I was once asked by our community director, we needed to try and figure out, or we are going to sort of ballpark, how many schools are in our Midwest region. You know, I as the senior high school coordinator, I work with students, communities in 14. I added Oklahoma to my region, so I believe it's 14 now. I work in 14 states. I'm the one high school coordinator. I have an assistant now. She's wonderful. She's from Columbus, and she's currently a freshman at Northwestern. She's excellent. I hope that one day she's running Stand With Us, because she's really quality. But it's the two of us. We're not doing enough. Our students I have 16 interns this year. I'm currently working with members of our teen leadership councils in 5 states at the moment. And that's 9 kids total. They're each doing works in their own communities to help address these issues. It's obviously not enough. This is one of the reasons that we, as an organization, and with our students, and we are strong advocates for the IHRA working definition. We're strong advocates for expanded Holocaust education, but also currently we are working in a number of areas where issues of how are Jews being portrayed in ethnic studies courses, in ethnic studies requirements out in California. There was an attempt to sort of write Jews out of, and Middle Eastern Jews out of a curriculum because Jews had, quote, achieved white privilege. That version of the draft is no longer the version that they are working on. But these are the kinds of issues that we're constantly seeing, and that unfortunately we can't follow all of them unless we hear from our students and unless we hear from the community. And unless we can be able to do that work in those individual communities, just because there are history requirements or just because there are Holocaust studies requirements, we do need to be pushing for better education. And it is something that requires constant vigilance. So to that end, I'm not sure I have a good answer about what they're being taught in these public schools, but it's the reason that we do try to expand our reach And it's the reason that we, again, I was put in touch with a student from Iowa, not Des Moines. That's the only thing I remember about this student at the moment. It was just recently. This student has no other support in their community for having these kinds of conversations. It's with either non-Jews or, again, we're hoping that these students are empowered enough to speak up for themselves. But I'll point back to the trauma of dealing with these issues. We're seeing it. We're getting upset by these examples, and we're adults. These kids don't have either the awareness, they don't have the life experience, they don't have the tools to be able to combat this without knowing that Stand With Us exists, that our community is behind us, that we speak out about these things. We sometimes ask ourselves, like, what would you do in the moment? But what are you doing to address these issues? What would you say? What are you encouraging your students to stand up and say? Because we don't know what is continuing to be taught in Baraboo. Again, the fact that they got the kind of community response, and again, not just whenever these things get national attention, that is not the kind of attention that a town like Baraboo, Wisconsin wants. So, hopefully there is that public kind of response, that there is that sort of backlash that sort of lets them know on a broader scale that that's not going to fly here. Hopefully, even if they aren't fixing it entirely, there's a lesson to be learned out of that controversy. And I think, again, we see that on the individual level. Deshaun Jackson was approached with, you need to educate yourself about this problem. You did a lot of harm. And he said that he was going to educate himself. And we'll actually get back to that point in a minute. But unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for your question, other than I work Monday through Friday. I answer my students' texts on weekends if I need to, but that is our continued work. And so I also want to thank your community for continuing to invite me back, so that we could talk about these very, very troubling issues. I saw one question about what is the ADL's position, was the position and function of the ADL. The ADL is the Anti-Defamation League, is obviously also an organization working to combat hatred and bigotry in different forms, and also obviously is focused on anti-Semitism. The ADL does a lot of hate mapping and hate tracking of hate groups, of anti-Semitic incidents, of hate crimes in different places. So the ADL is an absolutely wonderful resource for addressing these types of things. The ADL is also not necessarily doing the direct on the ground student work. They do have some workshops. I think they're called, I don't remember the name of their workshop. It's something about identifying hate, combating hate. But they're a very effective organization as well. I just think one of the differences between our work is going to be the way I work with interns and work with our teen councils. But the ADL also is a very strong organization in having, I don't believe, I didn't include what they commented on this specific issue, but they also had, they also made their statements. But one thing I do want to highlight here is Zach Banner. And again, for an example of
about anti-Semitism.
For another example of responses for responses from players who if we're not familiar with the NFL, we might not know that Zach Banner plays for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and that's important, and you'll understand why in just a moment. Except that it is opening the link and not okay, so that didn't work. Great. I will find the video and I will drop it in the link in just a moment. Zach Banner, if I can just paraphrase what he says, Zach Banner is I don't know why this is linking to a video file. I actually have this pulled up right here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can share different, it's a very good video. I would like everyone to be able to see it. So I'm just going to share this very quickly.
It's a beautiful morning this morning, but I haven't been able to, I'm just going to be honest.
Quick check. Can people hear it?
very low level.
I'll do my best to fix that, but also maybe for the video, turn up your own volume if you're having issues, because I'm maxed out, but then when I come back, maybe fix your volume so I'm not screaming at anybody. I'm not trying to scream at anybody, but here we go.
To be honest, I haven't been able to sleep in the last couple hours because I woke up this morning to the news about the Deshaun Jackson and his incident with the Jewish community, and I saw his apology video, and it seems like his heart's in the right place. So understand that this video isn't even towards him; it's towards that idea and mindset that sparked it in the first place. There's a common misbelief amongst black and brown people, and I know this from growing up, and I've heard it and I've listened to it, that Jewish people are just like any other white race. You know, like it's just you mix them up with the rest of the majority, and you don't understand that they're a minority as well. I didn't know this until I went to USC, and I had friends who are now family members, believe it or not, who are part of the Jewish community, current students and alumni. And also I was here on the team, my first year with the team, a couple of years ago during it's just tough, man, during that synagogue shooting in this beautiful city of Pittsburgh. And we need to understand that Jewish people deal with the same amount of hate and similar hardships and hard times. And I'm not trying to get emotional right now, but I want to preach to the black and brown community that we need to uplift them and put our arms around them just as much. When we talk about the Black Lives Matter and we talk about elevating ourselves, we can't do that while stepping on the back of other people to elevate ourselves. And that's very, very important to me, and that it should be important to everyone. We can't preach equality, but in result, we're just trying to flip the script and change the hierarchy, if that makes sense. Change your heart, put your arm around people, and let's all uplift each other. Have a great day.
So, for anyone who did not see that video, I like to be sure to show it as a course of this presentation, because one of the things that we frequently come into contact with, again, is feeling like we are fighting this on our own. And I love the screenshots here because this is Zach Banner. It's one NFL player to another, but the comments on it are from Zach Shardage, who was formerly one of our campus coordinators at Stand With Us. You have the state of Israel thanking Zach Banner for his comments. And you have Jeff Schwartz, another former NFL player who also had a very, very strong condemnation of this situation, except Jeff Schwartz is a Jewish NFL player. And so his comments were slightly different than Zach, who I thought it was just so important to hear him say he didn't know anything about anti-Semitism until going to college and coming into contact with anti-Semitism through being in college. So this is not something that people just know. It's something that we need to be willing to teach. And also, I knew I was doing the right thing by putting in a Zach Banner, by putting in the video, because Roz Rothstein said that she was grateful to Zach Banner for speaking the truth. Roz Rothstein, for anyone who might recognize, is the CEO of Stand With Us. So I knew I made a very good decision. So as we're looking at this situation, we've seen the community identify anti-Semitism. We've seen that people have taken action. And so now our next step is education. I think it's so critical that we also understand that in the days following Deshaun Jackson's comment, you had Julian Edelman, who plays for the New England Patriots and is a Jewish NFL player. Deshaun and I spoke for a while last night. We're making plans of our experience to educate one another and grow together. Adam Schefter breaks sports news. So again, these are not people who work in the field of Israel or Jewish education. These are sports personalities. You have Adam Schefter breaking the news that Deshaun Jackson had agreed to visit Auschwitz and to educate himself further on this issue. And then from the Jewish education and Holocaust education world, you have David Edelman from the local Philly Holocaust Memorial, who also offered additional education right there in Philly. But perhaps most importantly about the education aspect of this work, within a week of this blowing up on the internet, you have Deshaun Jackson sitting down with a Holocaust survivor. This Holocaust survivor, Mr. Mossberg, usually educates on the March of the Living. Due to COVID, there was no March of the Living, and so in this year. And so instead, you have him sitting here educating Deshaun Jackson about the Holocaust. You have them putting this on social media. And one of the things that I think is so important here is that on Deshaun Jackson's Instagram page, you can no longer find the anti-Semitic comment. It's been taken down. What you can still find there is this post with over 104,000 interactions showing that in his apology, when he said, "I'm going to continue to educate myself," here is the proof that it's being done. Now, I still don't know Deshaun Jackson. I still don't know if he was sincere, but I've got to believe that after all of this, the message of education, the community outcry, this is now what we're going to remember from this, not just the initial incident. And so in moving forward, the thing that we need to continue to be inspired to do is to remember that when we identify hate speech, we're able to teach our communities something about where our red lines are. We are able to say as a community, this, by definition, this is what we take issue with. We can define it. We can see it. We know what it is. We cannot be deceived into thinking, oh, that's not what you meant. We expect action, whether it's from the organization, whether it's from the school, whether it's from your friends. We expect somebody to speak out and say something, because hate speech only makes us feel alone and intimidated if nobody says anything, if the graffiti isn't washed off of the wall, if legal action isn't taken, which is why we also encourage our students to collect evidence. Stand With Us has a very active legal department that helps students deal with those kinds of issues as well, but not always the first course of action. And then finally, we're offering education. We are experts in dealing with anti-Semitism. Many of the people that we are dealing with are not. We need to be patient. We need to be willing to share that information. We need to be willing to express exactly how difficult these issues are when we come up in front of them. And we need to be able to describe that hatred as being as harmful to our society as we know it is. Because ultimately what we are doing here is we are addressing trauma. These are scary moments. I don't know if anyone's had, I hope people have not had aggressive personal experiences with anti-Semitism. I'm actually personally very fortunate to say that I don't feel like I have, but I work with students who have. I work with people, I have friends who didn't know what to do. And at Stand With Us, the thing that we try and empower our students to understand is that you're not always going to know the perfect answer to every situation, but you will never feel scared or intimidated not to act in any situation. It can be very daunting, it can be very intimidating, but our goal is that empowerment. And to obviously not diminish exactly how harmful this is if it goes unchecked. So with that, that is our crash course in identifying anti-Semitism and acting out against it. And I also, in helping prepare this presentation, I've actually shared this message with many of my students who are looking to put together their own programming around Purim this year. The idea, I'm no rabbi here, and I'll turn it back to Rabbi Okin in a second, but something that always stood out to me was the story, and maybe I'm misremembering because, again, just a Jewish studies degree. I love the aspect of the Purim story that to approach the king without permission, to speak up out of turn, is punishable by death. until Esther does it. She explains what's wrong. How many parties does she have to throw? Dinner parties does she have to throw before she actually gets that courage? Because it's terrifying. Because swastikas say to all of us, somebody here doesn't like me. And even worse, it says somebody here wants me dead. That's not easy to deal with for any of us, especially not for teenagers. So that's why we speak out. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Adam. It's a pleasure and a very informative presentation. Just wanted to wrap up with a short idea, transitioning from the workshop on anti-Semitism into the holiday of Purim a little bit deeper than the idea that you mentioned, Adam. Speaking of advocacy, the Megillah mentions how Mordechai advocated with his relative Queen Esther to intervene with her husband Achashverosh, the king of that whole region. The Megillah describes how Esther waited for the right moment and respectfully explained the situation to Achashverosh, what a threat to her personal life, to the life of her community it would be if Haman's decree was allowed to stand. However, that's not the end of the story, as we all know. Mordechai organized the Jewish people to pray and to refocus their lives on their relationship with God, because only God can truly protect the Jewish people. And that's exactly what happened. Achashverosh did what no other anti-Semitic dictator has ever done, to my knowledge, which is allow the Jews to defend themselves against the very same anti-Semitic decree that he allowed to occur and he encouraged to occur. Only God can make something that improbable take place. The message for us tonight is keep your eyes out for anti-Semitism. Advocate, be informed to correct any issues that you see in the broader world. But the Megillah adds on to all of those ideas to never forget that it's God who saves the day. We only can do the best that we can. But in the end, Hashem is who saves us from all those who try to destroy us over the thousands of years. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and have a wonderful evening and a wonderful Purim.
Thank you very much, Adam. I'll just add in and thank everyone for being with us. If anyone would like to ask Adam if I could impose on your time any further questions or just stay behind and chat, feel free to stay in the room. So I'll just say goodbye to everyone and wish everyone a good evening as well. But I'll open up the floor to any questions or comments that anyone would like to share before we all say goodnight to each other.
Thank you so much. I'm also just going to drop in the chat, if anyone knows of high school students rising 11th or 12th graders, our nomination period for the next year of interns is currently open. So www.standwithus.com/nomination is where those nominations of motivated high school students can be made. Again, for juniors or seniors, that's rising 11th or 12th grade. And it would be great to work with students from the St. Louis community.
Adam, wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. On your last slide, you said you had trauma, empowerment, and you took the slide away before I could copy the third bullet point. What was that?
Yeah, here, I would be happy to
Thank you.
share that again. And we are down here. Yeah, so our goal is to help students feel empowered with resources. So again, of course, and you know, like I mentioned, with our high school students, so much of what we end up dealing with is that not knowing what to do. Through Stand With Us, we're very fortunate to not only deal with these kind of issues all of the time, but we were created to be an organization with resources for students combating anti-Semitism and anti-Israel hatred on their college campuses. We have written materials. We have staff who are on hand to help. We have a legal team who is prepared to reach out to our network of lawyers to be able to help students dealing with administrative issues, to deal with being told by their whatever it might be, we wanted to be those resources. Because again, there is not one cookie cutter, this will fix anti-Semitism answer. And so instead, we need the students to know that when you don't know who to go to, first of all, your community, you have a community around you. And if you don't think that that's enough, you also have Stand With Us.
Adam, I'd like to put forward, first of all, thank you very much for an excellent presentation. And I thank Rabbi Smason, Rabbi Okin for bringing this to us. I think, oh, my video's off. I think that my big concern is that there's no education out there in countrywide where it may have been in the 60s and 70s. Matter of fact, I think there's a very big lack of education about the atrocities that were committed to American Indians, American Mexicans, American Black people. There's a whole, we can go up and down the list and spend all day and say who's got problems. But I want to point out one thing about Baraboo, the city of Baraboo. It is the International Clown Hall of Fame and Research Center. So I hope that's not indicative of the rest of the country. But I would like to see education across the country about hate, where kids are being taught that hatred against any group of people is not acceptable.
Yeah, and Alan, I didn't know that. So thank you very much for sharing that tidbit about Baraboo. But I think that sentiment is shared by so many of us. And again, in so many of our communities, we actually are doing additional work to be working with state legislatures to educate them about the importance of Holocaust education. We actually, in our Chicago office, we have our community director, Peggy Shapiro, was born in a displaced persons camp, and obviously her parents had survived the Holocaust. We are very passionately working on promoting the issues at the level of state governance, at local governance, to be able to push these kinds of issues, because we see a severe lack of Holocaust education across the country. And again, even when it is implemented, it's not always implemented well. And I've gotta say, I got, again, degrees in history. Like I understand how to speak to a classroom full of, a secular classroom to explain history, not from a biased Jewish perspective, but as a historian would, the ones who aren't anti-Semitic. But when we talk about these kinds of issues, there's a lot that we at Stand With Us, that we have this information. We could do a lot more Holocaust education, and we could do it really well. There's an issue of getting into schools. There's an issue of schools prioritizing social studies coursework in general, and to be educating about these issues. It's probably not getting as much attention as we would all like. And so that's one of the reasons that we do continue to monitor what state laws there are about improving Holocaust education. And we do work with students to help promote that. Although our work with government is obviously not generally from pushing certain agendas as a nonprofit organization, but certainly working with those state legislators to help them understand the magnitude of these issues. So we're actively working on that as well. The problem is just always going to be that there aren't that many Jews, and so we need to be educating people how to do anti-Semitic education about anti-Semitism and education about the Holocaust really well.
May I ask a question?
Please.
Okay, so as you said, you're reaching about 16 states, which must probably have a couple, 2,000-3,000 schools.
We actually estimated that there are over 10,000 high schools within the Midwest region alone.
So, I mean, two of you reaching 10,000 high schools is quite a tall order. And
Yes.
even if you try to educate those, do all those high schools have Jewish kids in them, or is that sort of only several of them have Jewish kids in them? I mean, I'm talking here logistics at the present moment.
Yeah, of course. It's a great question.
Because the reason I asked about ADL is because I'm not sure what your resources are, but ADL certainly has deep pockets that they could extend their, besides litigation, besides going after listing all the hate groups and so on, they could go after being proactive, because if they are going to be just simply reactive is too late. Proactive means education. Proactive means going after kids at the earliest age, high school, because they're the most impressionable at that point.
Mhm.
So unless it's kind of on the level of the Union of Rabbis, whatever, or the ADL or whatever, somebody at that level that's addressing this topic, it's kind of, we are playing catch up.
Yeah. And, unfortunately, again, to just sort of lean on the history of Stand With Us, the founders of our organization actually were waiting in 2001, during the Second Intifada. They were waiting to see what responses were going to be given by much larger organizations to address the kind of disinformation that was coming back from the reporting of the Second Intifada, the kind of disinformation that led to really vile anti-Semitism on college campuses. And they didn't see it. They didn't know who was supporting those students. Like the ADL did not necessarily make it clear to campus students, like, hey, when this happens, we've got your back. At least was the feeling amongst those that founded the organization. And again, not to call out the ADL, like the response,
go ahead and call it out.
The response from anybody. There was a need to address the issue for the students, to give the students resources. And so in that way, we were created out of sort of this reaction to be able to say, it's not just about what are we doing in society, it's also about how are we engaging these students, giving them this education to be empowered to stand up for themselves. It's not just, when they experience anti-Semitism, what will they do? We also need them to then go to campus prepared to engage, to build relationships with other student groups, to do proactive educational work, not just responding to anti-Semitism. And so out of that desire to not just be reacting to these incidents, we decided the best way to empower students before they go to campus was to work with them in high schools. And so 10 years after our founding, we started the high school department. And out of the high school department, we realized, and again, we started as an Israel education organization and then also added combating anti-Semitism to our primary mission a few years ago, because we really were trying to focus on how do we address anti-Semitism as it relates to Israel. And what we are realizing in our continued work is that our students aren't just addressing anti-Semitism as it relates to Israel. They're still lacking these resources to just address everyday anti-Semitism. And again, the thing that I will say, not against anyone else, not to call out anyone else, the thing that we are doing is that we are working directly with these interns. We're working directly with the students. I'm asking my students, what are the needs of your community? What kind of bigotry are you seeing? What kind of education is lacking? And how do we help you develop programming that's going to address your unique audiences? It needs to be done at sort of the level that I can work personally with these students. But then we also need the kind of presentations, the kind of, bigger outreach where I can go and give presentations like this one, like you're asking, to Jewish and non-Jewish schools. To Jewish schools, usually in the context of, hi, you should be able to do this too. And if you can't, there are resources, there are people to help you. And to secular institutions to say, whether you have a Jewish community or not, this is something this is a problem that you are part of. or that you can have a part in fixing. I actually was invited my first year on the job, and I'm happy to report that I've been invited back every year since, so I must be doing an okay job. There's a performing arts boarding school. There's a performing arts boarding school up in Interlochen, Michigan. It's way up there. And I've been invited out because they teach a course in Middle Eastern literature. And instead of just inviting a Palestinian from the University of Michigan to come and speak, they also want to hear an Israeli perspective. I'm not Israeli, but I hope that I did do a pretty okay job. And I'm invited to go and speak with this classroom of students every single year. And there was a request to receive my email, which I'm happy to share. But I go and I work with them for most of the time. Again, these are performing arts students, and also they're very, very talented. They are not necessarily doing. They're not coming from these backgrounds. They're coming from all over the country. They're coming sometimes international students. I'm sometimes the first person who's ever been informed about Israel to tell them more about it. So we do have those opportunities when I bring Israeli soldiers on our Israeli soldiers tour, which unfortunately we haven't done in a couple of years for very obvious reasons. We bring them to junior ROTC in the suburbs of Detroit. We bring them to public high schools. We let people just meet Israelis. And we're very fortunate that we get that kind of positive response. So no, we are not exclusively working within the Jewish community. We are doing work outside of the Jewish community as well. And in the issue that will keep me up at night, of course, it's never enough work. But we're engaging the students so that they can each do this on their own and hopefully spread.
Thank you.
Of course, thank you.
Okay, good night, everyone. Thanks, Adam. Thanks again,
Yeah,
everyone.
thank you
Be
so
well.
much for having me.
Okay, take care.